Hello there. Welcome to this video guide, which is designed to help you prepare for your OCR Controlled Assessment Spoken Language Study. We're going to focus specifically on this question: how does Barack Obama try to unite the nation in his presidential victory speech? And also, how does his speech differ in more informal contexts? Here's the advice I'm going to give you. I'm going to ask you to look first of all at the speech and choose relevant evidence. Then for each piece of evidence, you need to link it to the context and purpose of the speech. You need to use technical terminology to describe the language, and you also need to compare this to more informal contexts of his speech. And you can find some videos of these more informal contexts on my blog, www.mrmccareyyear10.blogspot.com. Okay, here we go. Let's start just by looking at some examples of the language in his speech. We're going to look first of all at the way he discusses change in his presidential election victory speech. And we're going to have a look at this quotation. "It's been a long time coming, but tonight, because of what we did on this day, in this election, at this defining moment, change has come to America." Now, to understand this change, we first of all have to remember that Obama ran his entire election campaign on a platform of unity and change, and here he's celebrating its success. Notice that his election slogan was "Change we can believe in," so he's celebrating the possibility of change. Looking at the particular language, he uses the pronoun "we," and this is inviting the public to share in his moment of victory. Not only that, but he uses the rule of three: this day, in this election, at this defining moment. And this allows him to emphasize his point and build to a climax on the words defining moment. So lots you can say there about the language. Now, looking at his description of change here in his speech, we can compare this to a more informal context. And I'm looking at his interview with David Letterman. Look at 1 minute 20 from the video on my blog. And in this interview, he says, whenever a president tries to bring about significant changes, then there is a certain section of the population that gets very riled up. So much more informal context. Look first of all at his use of the filler, It's in stark contrast to his polished presentation in that election night speech. He's thinking off the cuff, and therefore he's got this filler which kind of shows that he's thinking as he goes along. Not only that, but you've got the hesitations indicated by the ellipses in my transcript here. And this shows that he's got a certain desire to get the answer right. He's not just talking to those people who voted for him and like him, he's also talking to the whole American public, and he's got to be really careful not to alienate them. And this might also explain why he uses the slang term "riled up," because it's slightly light-hearted. It's not an accusation at the people who got angry. And it shows he doesn't want to appear too critical, but at the same time he wants to show that change can aggravate people. So we're comparing his formal language when describing change to the informal in the interview. Okay, next, let's look at the way he talks about race, which is obviously a significant part of the first black president's election. In his election night speech, he says, "She was there for the buses in Montgomery, the hoses in Birmingham, and a preacher from Atlanta who told the people that we shall overcome." Now it's interesting here because Obama's invoking the memories of various significant moments in the civil rights movement over the previous 50 years. But he's not doing it with reference to himself. Instead, he's picking on Annie Nixon Cooper, the 106-year-old he talks about in his speech, and he's avoiding referring to his victory as part of this history, even though the rest of the world's talking about it as a victory for civil rights. He's defining himself as a president, not a black president, but by referring to Annie Nixon Cooper, he's kind of demonstrating that he's aware of the racial element of his election. Not only that, but he uses this highly emotive quotation from Martin Luther King's speech, "We shall overcome." It's from an American civil rights song saying that we shall persevere, we shall overcome, things will get better. And so these words are very resonant, they're very significant words. Okay, comparing his formal discussion of race here then to a far more informal one. And I've chosen this background here, Obama, half-breed Muslim, to show that there was a lot of opposition to Obama in the run-up to its election on the grounds of his race. And in his interview then with Letterman, and this is at 0:45 in the same video as before, he says, well, first of all, I think it's important to realise that I was actually black before the election. He makes a joke out of it. First of all, let's look at this false start. Well, first of all, and this demonstrates a level of discomfort at discussing such a sensitive issue. Obama knows that people are going to criticise him whatever he says here, and so he's taking his time, he's being very careful to avoid getting it wrong, and therefore what he ends up doing is making a joke out of it. I was actually black before the election. This is light-hearted. It's an attempt to engage those who are suspicious of him, either due to his race or because they think that he's playing the race card. So he's much more casual, but he achieves the same end. Okay, moving on then, in his speech he also talks about the economy. And obviously at the time of his election, the American economy was in tatters. Lots of people had lost their jobs, lots of people had lost their homes. So this is a big deal for the American public. And when talking about the economy, he says, we cannot have a thriving Wall Street while Main Street suffers. In this country, we rise or fall as one nation, as one people. Okay, let's see what we can say about this. First of all, the context. Obama uses Wall Street to represent the rich, wealthy parts of society who maybe could be seen to cause the economic downstreet, but then he uses Main Street to represent the average Americans. So he's trying to appeal to those average Americans and saying, I'm looking after you, I'm not just looking after the rich fat cats, which is really significant in the time the speech was made. Look at the alliteration of street suffers when he's talking about Main Street. He's emphasising his empathy with the suffering of working people, again, trying to draw them in. Okay. And also the repetition of one nation, one people. It's a call for unity, it's a call to stand together in the face of the hardships which America is facing. Okay, that's the formal context from the speech. Let's look at the informal context. And this I've taken from his Will Smith interview. This is 2 minutes and 50 seconds into the interview, which is on my blog. And he says, are there ways that we can work together to build a new well rather than fight over the well we've got? A couple of things to say here. First of all, it's a rhetorical question. It's designed to provoke guilt from the audience and a sense of social responsibility, which is something Obama's always wanted to provoke. He uses a metaphor, the metaphor of the well, and this is intended as a non-confrontational approach to the issue. He's not trying to blame anybody, but he's trying to call people together to stand side by side. So this metaphor is slightly more informal than where we were in his speech, but it's really significant in kind of trying to create that unity. He also repeats the word we, which is intended to demonstrate that the only solution to this problem is a shared solution. Okay, finally then, to recap what you've got to do in your spoken language study. Your question, how does Barack Obama try to unite the nation in his presidential victory speech, and how does his speech differ in more informal contexts? You've got to start by picking evidence from the speech. I've talked here about the economy, about race, and about change. You could also write about things like unity. You could write about the way he talks about family, the way he talks about war, the way he creates a sense of hope, or any other themes that crop up in the speech. Once you've chosen that evidence, you have to link the evidence to the context and the purpose of the speech. Why is he saying what he's saying? Where does it come from and what's he trying to achieve? When you've done that, you need to use technical terminology to describe the language, and finally, you need to compare your quotation from the speech to something from a more informal context, which you can find in the videos on my blog. Hope it's been helpful. Enjoy.